Hello, everyone. Hopefully I'm coming through. Welcome to the Ask the Team session for this evening. I'm here with most of the SQL Server team. And let's just get some of the housekeeping items out of the way. We'll be going very quickly through some expectations for this session. And then after that, we'll let the team that's online today introduce themselves. Then we'll go into the meat and potatoes of the session, which is the open question and answer. And we'll be closing off a couple of minutes before the hour so that we can have some parting messages for you. About how to engage in this session. So you have a chat box to ask your questions. Please ask them there. You can post anonymously. You can leave your name. We actually prefer to talk to people with a name. So if you feel comfortable with that, please do it. The questions will appear as they are approved. So we have with us today two of the PMs in the team, Sia and Amit. Amit will be reading the questions out loud, and one of the experts that's in the session will answer depending on the area. Now, if you will also be trying to answer the questions in writing and publishing them so that everyone can see the answer. In case you think the answer is useful and you're satisfied, please upvote the favorites using the thumbs up button. We'll have all the experts answer verbally, but we'll also try to type in the answer. As for etiquette, I mean, let's if you can advance to the next slide. Yeah. So we'll be recording this session only for internal use. So please don't record the session yourselves. Try not to spam the chat if possible. And the spam is just the sense of ask the questions that you want to ask, obviously. Don't try not to engage outside that point. And we have a code of conduct. You probably have seen it in other sessions. We ask you to adhere to that code of conduct. And it typically has to do with being sure that we don't harass others, we don't discriminate, and all our Microsoft values are well on display, both by us, the presenters, but obviously all the community that joins us today. So without further ado, let's meet the team that's with us today. Take it away, Brian.
Hi, my name is Brian Carrick, and I focus mainly on replication, persistent memory, in-memory database technologies. Over to Kevin, is it next?
Yep. So I'm Kevin Farley. I'm right now handling HIDR, both Windows and Linux. I've been around the engine for quite a while, and so I've got my fingers in a lot of things, but that's where I'm focused right now. Pam?
We can't hear you, Pam.
Thank you. It's a little bit late. I didn't hit my mute button. Hi, everyone. I'm Pam Lahoud. I am primarily responsible for the storage engine area, but I also cover SQL Server running in Azure VM and the SQL OS. And over to Pedro, which you already know, I guess.
Hi, everyone. I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself in the beginning. We had an order to this. My name is Pedro Lopes. I'm a PM with all these fine folks that have been speaking so far. I am mainly focused on the relational engine, so that's the query processor, query performance, also some around programmability space. And I also handle SQL Server end of support, which was last July in what relates to 2008 and 2008 R2. And over to Saurabh.
Hey everyone, my name is Saurav Agarwal. I lead program management for Azure SQL Edge, which went into public preview yesterday. I'm glad to talk to you guys and answer questions you may have on SQL Edge. Over to you, Tejas.
Thanks, Saurav. So my name is Tejas. I'm principal program manager on the same team. I lead our strategy for SQL Server on Linux, including on Azure IaaS platform as well. Yeah, over to you, Ben.
Hello, world. I see a lot of folks saying hi from around the world. It's only a few times a year I get to say that. My name is Vin. I am a PM on the same team. My focus areas are SQL and containers, as well as I'm also one of the PMs for Azure Data Services on Azure Arc. All right, so back to you, Pedro.
Thanks, Vin. So we have, as you've seen, a lot of folks in today's session, and we are prepared to cover a number of topics that you may want have questions about. What you see, or what you'll be seeing in the slide in a second or so, there you go, is some of the topics you can definitely ask us about, and we have expertise in the session presenters today. But if there are questions that you may have that don't fall into these topics, feel free to ask them. We may not have a readily available answer, and if we don't, and if you leave your name or you provide us your contact later through Twitter or something like that, we'll be happy to provide whatever information we can. But these are the topics that some of us, as we presented ourselves, mentioned that we can definitely cover. So feel free to start asking your questions then. Amit,
Yep.
do we have anything to start with?
Yeah, we have a lot of questions that we've started coming in. Let's go with the first question here, which is asked by Hugo. Hugo wants to know what features are planned for vNext. Pedro, you want to take that?
Sure. vNext is something that we have not announced yet, and we, alas, can't share any roadmap for vNext at this point in time. That is the shortest answer, and I'm sorry it's not popular, but we really can't share any roadmap at this point.
All righty. Okay, we have another question here. I'm just going to read the question aloud. It is, with the focus of Microsoft on Azure Cloud and a lot of cloud-based services not being available on premises without a lot of work, what is the position in future of SQL Server on premises, I think is what the question is. So who would like to take this?
Maybe we should hand that to Vin to talk about Azure Arc.
Yeah, I think you know, one very cool, interesting area. You might have heard of Azure Arc, which we introduced in Ignite, but the whole idea of Azure Arc is over time, what we're trying to do is extend the Azure cloud. With that, what we really mean is extending some of what we've learned in Azure in terms of security, as well as some of the features that we have there. So I'm not gonna, you know, there's a whole session on it later during build, so I encourage you to take a look at that, as well as content at the Microsoft website. So we, you know, for one of the things that in terms of specific to SQL though, we do have Azure Data Services on Azure Arc, which you could deploy on any infrastructure. So I would encourage you to check that out.
Cool. All righty. The next question that we have for you guys is, what is the status of in-memory tables? It was a big thing earlier, but how did it work out? Is it supported in Azure? What is the target usage scenario for this technology? Okay, this looks like 3 questions, but you know what? We'll break this question in the first form, which is, what is the target usage for in-memory tables? Pedro, Pam, would anyone of you would want to take this?
Yeah, I can take that one.
Sure.
So in-memory tables, the full name is InMemory OLTP, and the reason for that is that memory optimized tables are beneficial for extremely high concurrency transactional processing systems. So lots of small, short transactions and a very large number of concurrent transactions. In fact, if you see the dynamic management views for in-memory OLTP, they all have XTP in the name, and that stands for extreme transaction processing. So the use case for in-memory OLTP is that kind of a workload. So the benefits of in-memory OLTP are removing friction from that concurrency. So lock-free, latch-free structures, also optimizing the code path by using natively compiled stored procedures. So that's really the workload. Some of the use cases customers are using that for are, we have some customers that use it for session state, for caching, for, you know, extremely low latency transaction processing for anything like I don't know, like a shop website, or even processing like IoT transactions, although that's probably moving over to Azure SQL Edge. So those are some of the use cases. It's very much still a thing, and it works out extremely well for many customers. And we are even starting to leverage that infrastructure for other things within the engine. So for example, in SQL Server 2019, we just released memory optimized TempDB metadata, which leverages those in-memory OLTP tables as non-durable tables, which means no disk I/O, no logging or anything. And we use that for the metadata structures in TempDB so that we can alleviate some very common contention points that can happen in TempDB. So that technology is very much still alive, and it's great for any sort of high concurrency workloads.
Perfect. Pam, there was also a second part to that question, which I think you kind of answered it, but I just want to reiterate that. The second part is the data always lost when you kind of restart the SQL Server with in-memory? So would you want to just answer that? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So I can add on to that. So the answer is not if you don't want it to be lost. So the data is fully resilient as any other data in the database, as long as the table is marked as durable. So the choice is yours. If it's data that's transient, so for example, a staging table or some sort of session state table that if the server were to crash, you can recover it, then you can mark the table as non-durable, and then it's much less overhead because it doesn't require any transaction logging and it doesn't require checkpointing to disk. But if you want the data to be durable, then you can mark the table as durable, and then any transactions that execute against that table do get logged into the transaction log, and they do get checkpointed. Although the checkpoint process for in-memory tables is different than the regular disk-based tables. So the only caveat to durable tables is that because the tables are in memory, that means if you restart the SQL Server service, we need to reload all that data into memory. So it can slow down your startup somewhat if you have a very large memory optimized table or set of tables in your database.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Pam. We'll move on to the next question. The next question is from Robbie, who asks, can we scale SQL Server on Linux horizontally on premises? So I think the deployments is for on premises. I'd think, Tejas, would you want to take that question about the scalability of SQL Server on Linux horizontally?
So the question here, the keyword here is horizontally, and I'm just trying to understand what is meant by that. And SQL Server on Linux, if you want to scale up, if you want to add more resources, you can keep adding more resources. It's just another SQL Server, which you can scale up to terabytes of memory, then hundreds of cores, and it just works. Now, in terms of scaling it horizontally, and if you are looking at more, having a multi-container scenario or having a multi-write-write scenario, I think Brian can answer some question around that on what you are looking for. But yes, in terms of resourcing, SQL Server on Linux scales just the way as any SQL Server.
Cool. Brian, you want to take part of that question?
Yes, I'm extremely limited in what I can say because of NDA nature and so on. But yeah, we are looking at exploring more multi-write type scenarios for SQL.
Wonderful. Thank you, gentlemen. We have the next question from Victor, and this is for SQL Edge. So Victor would want to know, what are the main use cases of the platform and what are the minimum hardware requirements for this implementation? And this is with respect to SQL Edge. Saurabh, you want to help us with that question?
Yes, absolutely. So I'll take the second part of the question first, the minimum hardware requirements. SQL Edge can run on any device with 1 core or 1 gig of memory. These devices can be Intel, AMD, or ARM64 devices. Given that it's a database product and you would potentially be doing complex data processing, it's recommended that you use a device with 2 GB or more of memory. From a platform or from a use case scenario perspective, SQL Edge is optimized and designed for IoT scenarios. Essentially scenarios where there is a need for processing of data locally at the origin itself. rather than waiting for the data to land in a cloud or a data center target before that data is processed.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Saurav. Okay, we have the next question. I think this is one of the PM's favorite questions. So this is from Marco, who would like to know, what is your favorite new feature in SQL 2019? So who would want to take a shot at that?
Well, I can start. I mean, probably each one of us has a favorite. I'm very partial to the new wave of intelligent query processing features, and also the adjustments that we've made to the query store feature, which is, in my perspective, a fundamental flight recorder that everyone should have in their system, both from a proactive and reactive perspective. And about intelligent query processing features, I like precisely the fact that without any implementation effort, for the most part, your legacy code can just leverage it out of the box to improve your workloads, and that's some of what excites me in the latest release.
Anyone else want to share what their favorite feature is?
I can talk.
Yes.
I can talk.
Oh,
sorry. Go ahead.
I knew this question is going to be hard.
So it's not one of the features that was under my purview coming up to the release, but the I keep calling it hackathonized TempDB or TempDB v2, where we convert the system tables to in-memory OLTP tables, and thereby get rid of a lot of lock and latch type weights on these system tables in TempDB. This would have been amazing to have as a customer 3 years ago, but it's great to see it out there.
Nice. Saurabh?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite feature is not something from SQL 2019. I mean, we are working towards getting this in the SQL platform or the overall SQL platform over the next few cycles, but it's more about data streaming, a feature which we added in SQL Edge, which allows real-time streaming of data from different sources into the SQL database. Speaking primarily about SQL 2019, my favorite feature would be the language extensibility. The capabilities which allows you to write code in any language of choice. Essentially, for example, we introduced support for Java. So write code in Java and then bring that code and run that inside SQL. That's just some powerful stuff there.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you, guys. I think I'll have to move to the next question and not going to take any more answers to that. All right. The next question that we have is, what's the difference between Azure Stack and Azure Arc? Azure Stack and Azure Arc.
I could take for sure. I could take a stab at that. So, one thing is both of them are part of Microsoft's strategy to offer hybrid scenarios. Azure Stack offers both hardware as well as software, like infrastructure on an infrastructure level, combined together, and it could be procured through our partners as well as Microsoft and deployed onto your environment. And Azure Arc is really layered on top of the infrastructure, and it's about the software layers. Both actually work together, and I know a lot of folks which one should I pick? It's actually you oftentimes pick both, so that you get both the hardware and the software to run a complete cloud, private cloud in your environment.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Win. Okay, we have this next question, which is about, will on-premises SQL Server and Azure SQL Database converge over time? I think this is one of the questions that most of the people using SQL Server kind of have, where they would want to know if SQL Server and Azure SQL Database converge over times, because database DBAs are at crossroads to future-proof their skill set. What is your advice? Who would want to take a...
I can take a stab at that.
Thanks, Kevin. Yeah, go ahead.
It's an interesting question because in a lot of cases, there's nothing to converge because it's all the same source code. So there's no separate source code between Azure SQL Database and SQL Server. The features are surfaced differently depending on the platform that they're delivered on. So there's some differences that way, but the engine is the engine. The difference is in the environment around it. So when you connect to an Azure SQL database, your scope is a single database. You don't get to interact with the server. You don't get to interact with multiple databases. And where they're starting to come together is in deployments like managed instance, Azure SQL Database managed instance, where you get a connection into a full SQL instance, but it's fully managed just like the other platform as a service databases. Hopefully that gives a small description of what the roadmap, how those relate to each other as I see them. Anybody else?
Can I just add something?
Yeah.
I just want to pile on in that extremely important thought that we have the same engine running across Azure SQL Database, including managed instance, and your on-premise SQL Server. That means that the application that runs today, that you've coded, that you've written all the code and tested on SQL Server 2012 to 2016, whatever the version, works the same way in whether you migrate to SQL Server 2019 or you migrate to Azure SQL, because like Kevin said, it's literally the same engine. And I would add to that the fact that you can use something like compatibility certification. If you go to aka.ms dbcompat, you'll know what I'm talking about. That will really drive forward your understanding of how we have literally the same engine. You can have an application that today you're running in SQL Server, tomorrow you'll be running it in Azure from an engine execution perspective, from an engine compatibility perspective. It will behave the same way. So that is really an important point to drive here.
Wonderful.
If I can add one more point to that.
Sure. Go ahead, Pam.
I think I heard that there was some concern about skills and future-proofing skills. And I hope that from what both Kevin and Pedro said, it becomes clear that whatever skills you have to manage SQL Server databases on-prem, those same skills are going to be relevant in the cloud. There's always going to be data that needs to be managed, and there's always going to be applications that need to be tuned and queries that need to be tuned. And while we do a lot for you when you're running in Azure SQL Database, we're doing the kind of the hard work, the work that you don't like doing, the backups and the HA and DR and configuring all that. We do all that for you so you can do the fun stuff like like tuning queries and writing new stored procedures and things like that. So most of your skills should translate. So you have a future, whether that's as a cloud DBA or an on-prem DBA or a hybrid DBA or whatever. Data is a good place to be.
One small anecdote on that is I was doing an executive briefing and described all the things that we do for you in Azure SQL Database, where we take care of the HA and the backups and the restores and all that stuff. And the CIO sat up and said, I want to be a DBA again, because you're taking care of all the stuff that I used to hate doing and leaving all the fun stuff. So there's that.
There is that. I will mention that security takes on a renewed focus, I think, in a PaaS service, and that is an area that can't be provided as a service.
Wonderful. All right, so we'll move to the next question. What we have here is Dennis who's asking, I'm not sure if this is in scope, but I think InMemory is in scope, so we'll take that. InMemory technology has an underneath relation with Filestream technology. However, InMemory were implemented in Azure SQL DB, but Filestream is considered much more difficult. Is the InMemory in Azure SQL DB different than the on-premises InMemory, which does depend on Filestream, and in case of Azure it doesn't? Who would want to take this?
I can take that one. The original version of InMemory OLTP was dependent on Filestream, but later versions we took away that dependency. Actually, Kevin, do you remember which version, or do you remember the details on that? Because were you doing any of that?
Yeah, mostly it's the part of InMemory OLTP or of Filestream that has problems in Azure is the direct file access, where we have a driver that sits in the Windows file system, which is not compatible with the Azure. The portions of Filestream that we use for the checkpoint files don't depend on that driver. So that's how we can get away with it in Azure. And I believe there's been some rewriting to write directly to the Azure Blob store as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Thank you, Pam. Thanks, Kevin. Let's go to another one. This is a pretty short question here. Can the memory be, I think he means the SQL Server, can the memory be stored in external storage at this point of time?
I'll
SQL Server? Yeah.
I'll take it. I'm gonna say no, but it is something that we're getting closer to this kind of converged memory idea with really fast NVMe and then persistent memory that's maybe slightly slower than your DRAM memory. So you're getting this convergence of technologies that are both kind of like memory and external. It won't be external in terms of like a USB that you plug in, but they will be external but attached to the processor at some point in the future.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much, Brian. Next question that we have is kind of futuristic. People would not like to know if there is going to be a web-based SSMS in Azure in future.
It's called Azure Data Studio.
Alrighty. Okay. Next one we have here is some advice on architecture. Jane has a team thinking of moving the database to cloud, and we are looking at several disaster recovery solutions. Do you have documents on which would be the best practice? Depending on the architecture. For example, which business case is good to select AG and which business case is good for data mirroring and sort of those technologies. So between the different options, which one should be chosen when? Would like to.
That's in my alley. I was looking for the question. Is it published?
I am publishing it right now.
It's a long one. I make sure I get it all.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's about what? Yeah, go ahead.
There's a lot of territory here, and HDR can be a huge topic. If you're talking about the platform as a service, Azure SQL database, we take care of most of that for you. We handle both HA and DR solutions within Azure SQL database. As far as choosing between technologies of availability groups or data mirroring, a lot of that depends on the specifics of both your HA requirements as well as your application. So it's really more of a case by case. There's no blanket sort of answer to that one. Within Azure SQL database, we leverage some of the always-on technology to provide HA for you. But there's really go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to add to that. I think there's a lot of awesome tech, and we talk a lot about technology. But at the end of the day, I think it's worthwhile taking a step back and asking yourself, hey, what am I trying to achieve with all these technologies? If it's high availability and good uptime, these are some of the things that we have built into Azure, as Kevin was mentioning. So really comes down to requirements, and based on your requirements, we have different technologies that addresses those needs.
Correct. Thank you so much. Okay, the next one here is about Query Store. Why isn't it on by default? The first question, and the second part to it is there a way that it can be turned on for all the user databases because it has low overhead? So,
okay, I can take that one. Why it's not on by default? So the intent is to eventually have it on by default. The reason we haven't turned it on by default yet, and it's been 3 versions already, has to do with the fact that while we test thoroughly our features, and we have around 700,000 tests running every day over our code base, there are millions of workloads out there running in SQL Server. So we usually, before we make a certain feature a default, we introduce it in an earlier version. Sometimes it's under a trace flag, sometimes it's more first-class citizen like Query Store, but it takes some time until we gather enough evidence about the low overhead, so the principle of do no harm, before we make a certain feature a default. So we are working towards that path. We just didn't get there with SQL 2019. Now, we do have it on by default in SQL Server, in Azure SQL. So if you create a database there, you will have Query Store turned on by default. Now, the other part of the question was, let me see the chat window here, was about if it's low overhead. Yeah, well, yes. Your mileage may vary, obviously. As we test, it is supposed to have low overhead. We have come a long way since we released it in SQL 2016 up until 2019 in terms of re-architecting the Query Store, in making sure that it consumes less and less resources. In 2019, you even have the chance to apply customized capture policy settings for your high-end workloads, because that's still some of the possible Achilles heel, is that OLTP server that has very high-end workloads. I'm talking about thousands of batch requests per second, ad hoc workload. So each new incoming execution is a brand new plan. That can still overwhelm the Query Store, and that is when you can, in 2019, use those custom settings to dial down and get a balance for the Query Store for those environments. But otherwise, the Query Store for any other workload behaves as it should, yes, with low overhead, and it provides you all the amount of information that you can use reactively to troubleshoot or proactively to understand what workload is running, and if you have up and coming bottlenecks in terms of query execution, or like Pam was mentioning before, you can dedicate your time to tuning queries. Query Store is amazing for you to uncover queries that may be taking more resources than they potentially could if they were further tuned, and you can use Query Store for that proactive work.
Wonderful. Thank you for that detailed answer, Pedro. The next question that we have is on the container scenario. So the question here is, in terms of production workloads and HADR scenarios for containers, which OS would you recommend? Specifically for servers as cattle scenarios.
Okay, yeah, for sure. I think that, first of all, I think that there are, we already have some customers since 2017, actually, 2017, who are running SQL in containers, for example. So that's DVO1. If you look at our Microsoft site, you'll see them as a use case. They're using it. In terms of running SQL in a production workload, there's a lot of things that you have to consider, just like you would in any migration, whether you're moving to the cloud or a different environment from bare metal to VM. In terms of the HA, it's the one that you asked. One thing I would really check out is Azure Data Services, Azure Arc, where we are running a SQL engine offered in Azure Data Services, Azure Arc, which will have built-in HA, and automated backups, as well as other, database as a service, if you may, service-like capabilities. So I would go check that out.
Wonderful. Thanks,
If I may add something, I think one of the part of the question referred to which OS would you recommend, and the answer here is it's just SQL Server, and it is compatible with multiple Linux distribution. It works just fine. So it's not a question of which OS. It's a question of how do you want to design and deploy your workload, and that helps you design if you want to deploy it as a container or a bare metal VM. I mean, it really depends upon your workload and your design, and this is one of the reasons why DBS are not going anywhere. They are the brain behind how to do everything.
Yeah, totally agree with that, Tejas. So, it's, not to overplay this term, but it's really about choice. And, at the end of the day, it's about your workload and your apps. If your apps are on VMs, we recommend VMs. If you're on containers, we recommend containers.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, gentlemen. All right, we'll move to the next question. The next question is about tooling. We have a person asking about, will there be a major upgrade on SSMS or something huge in Azure Data Studio that we should expect?
Yeah, I can take that one because I was reading the question and they were specifically asking about SQL Server developers, right?
Yes.
And so Azure, I'm not sure if it's clear that Azure Data Studio is for all versions of Azure Data, whether you're running SQL Server. I mean, we're part of the Azure Data team. So Azure Data Studio works perfectly well for SQL Server. And in fact, it's a great tool for developers. And so there's nothing we have to build on top of Azure Data Studio. It's already a very dev-centric, developer-focused tool. And there's a lot of really great stuff in there if you haven't played with it yet, between notebooks and Jupyter books and just that nice, clean, like Visual Studio Core shell. It's a great tool for developers, especially if you're coming from like app dev into SQL Server dev. It's kind of a familiar environment. So I would say most of the tooling innovation that's coming out now is definitely focused around Azure Data Studio. There will be some improvements in SSMS as well, and we're trying to kind of converge some of those experiences between SSMS and ADS, Azure Data Studio. But those tools are available for you now. Azure Data Studio works for SQL Server as well as for Azure SQL DB.
And if I may add to that, Pam, if you haven't tried out the new machine learning extension to Azure Data Studio, please do try that. It's in preview starting yesterday. It allows you to build or bring ML models from Azure ML and run it inside SQL Server, or also to train new ML models using the machine learning services in SQL Server.
Mm-hmm. Sort of, I just want to add one more question to this, because I think both of them are kind of related. There's a question here that they would want to know, what are other programming language support that we are bringing to Azure SQL? Would you like to also take that?
I don't have a definite answer on that unless someone on the team has it. But I think the plan is to make the extensibility framework as close to SQL Server on premises as possible. Mm-hmm. I don't know if I'm not aware of the timelines of that work, but essentially that's the idea.
Okay, and now we'll just move to another question, which I think is all-time favorite. Do we have a table level restore in SQL right now?
I can take that one. So the short answer is no, we don't have that to be able to just restore a single table from a backup. We don't have that now. It's definitely something we've talked about. I think it's like the #2 request on our user voice site, on our SQL feedback site, aka.ms/wax SQL feedback. So it's definitely something we've been considering, but we don't have it yet.
Perfect. Okay, we'll move to the next one. The next one is about what improvements does the Columnstore have in with respect to 2017. So what new features do we have in 2019 with respect to which wasn't there in 2017? What were the improvements?
I can take that one, or at least part of that one. There's a couple of things that were done in Columnstore, especially to alleviate the need to do some index grooming. For example, in 2019, there's a new background task that is a helper for the tuple mover to when and it has a few internal thresholds. When we see that open row groups have been there for some time, so some time has elapsed, and those groups are still open, we will compress those groups and make sure they are part of the column store. Or for example, if we detect that there are row groups that have a sizable amount of records that were deleted, and we have a number of row groups that have a lot of deleted data, we will choose to do a background merge of those. And that, for example, by doing that as a background task, that allows you to not have to worry so much about having jobs to reorganize your indexes, for example. Although bulk data deletion is not the necessarily the recommendation for column store. You should, for example, use a partitioning and then do switch out, switch in, and truncate on the side. But the point is, there are a number of background improvements to column store. Those are documented, by the way. So if you go into our documentation and look for column store indexes, you will see that these specific 2019 features are documented there. Yes. I don't know if someone else wants to add something.
I think we are good. I think we do have a good amount of, a complete page dedicated to the improvements that we've kind of made to the column store part of it. All right. With this, we'll go to the next question. Next question is a little out of the scope. Let me know if you would want to park this, but I think it's a question that most of the customers out there would have. Assume that a customer is moving to SQL Server Azure SQL. What ETLs do they have on cloud? Can they use SSIS, or do they have any other options? Would you want to take this?
I can take that, Amit. So in Azure, you have Azure Data Factory, and Azure Data Factory also includes an implementation of SQL Server integration services. So that becomes your primary ETL mechanism for Azure deployments. And then if you heard about Azure Synapse Links today, if you're using Synapse, you can also use things like Synapse Links to create this data virtualization aspect between different products in Azure.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks, Saurabh. Okay, I think this next question, I know who's going to answer this from the panel. I can pretty much guess it. The question is about, the Prasad wants to know, can we talk about some of the improvements in TempDB in SQL 2019? Pam, do you want not to answer that question?
Name, yeah. Sure. Well, so we already, I mentioned earlier when we were talking about InMemory OLTP, the main improvement we did in SQL Server 2019 was to introduce memory optimized TempDB metadata. And it's a lot of words to talk about a little thing we did, which was move all the system tables into non-durable memory optimized tables. And by doing that, we can access them without latches or locks, which improves concurrency there. And so one of the main scalability bottlenecks that customers face in TempDB that can't be overcome with configuration is latch weights on the system table. So that was a huge improvement in throughput for customers who are super TempDB heavy. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't still do all those TempDB best practices, like having multiple files and making sure those multiple files are equally sized and that sort of thing. That's still important on 2019 because that addresses a different kind of bottleneck that can occur in TempDB. But the memory optimized TempDB metadata helps solve that metadata contention. There are a couple of other small things that went into 2019 that we uncovered as we resolved this TempDB metadata contention, which was kind of this huge bottleneck. Once we got that huge bottleneck out of the way, we found a couple of other little bottlenecks along the way. So there are also some caching improvements, some memory object improvements. There's a couple of other little things that we did for scalability that are all on by default. So you should see some improved throughput on TempDB just by upgrading. And then the memory optimized TempDB is not on by default. That's something that you would have to enable. So then if you decide that you're heavy on TempDB and you're seeing this metadata contention, then you can turn that on as well. So that's most of the TempDB improvements. I will mention one other little thing that's sort of tangentially related to TempDB, and that's ADR, accelerated database recovery. So that's this really cool new functionality that allows you to recover your databases and rollback transactions instantaneously. And one of the ways it does that is by leveraging something called the persistent version store. So if you're using row versioning based isolation like RCSI, read committed snapshot isolation, or snapshot isolation, that uses a version store that's stored in TempDB. If you turn on ADR, accelerated database recovery, then we convert that into the persistent version store, which gets stored inside the database. So that takes some weight off of TempDB and moves it into the back into the user database. So you get all this cool stuff that ADR allows you to do, like instantaneously roll back transactions, super fast failovers, things like that. And plus, you take some of that weight off of TempDB by moving the version store into the database. So those are the main things I can think of for TempDB. Oh, wait, there's one more. I almost forgot. So the other one is the PFS contention. So concurrent PFS updates. So PFS is another one of those data object allocation pages that we use that people can get contention on. And that's one of the reasons why you have multiple data files, because you have multiple data files, you have multiple PFS pages, and you can alleviate some of that contention. Well, we introduced the concurrent PFS updates so that sometimes even if you have lots of data files, you still get that PFS contention. Sometimes it still happens. And so with this concurrent PFS updates, you should never see PFS contention again. It should just go away. So that was the last improvement for TempDB.
Wonderful. Wonderful. That's quite a lot of improvements into the TempDB in 2019 with respect to 2017. That's wonderful. So I hope that answers that. Next question that we have is more general in terms that I have for the panel here. The question is about with the advent and popularity of non-relational databases, what's the future that you see for SQL and relational database skills? I keep this question open to the panel. Anyone can take a stab at it.
This is going to be relevant forever.
Yeah. Well, if anyone is paying attention to the news of late, there's a desperate shortage of COBOL programmers again. So it seems some languages really do stick around for a while, and SQL is another one of those. So no matter where you go in your career in tech, I think the ability to know SQL will stand to you.
And I mean, at the risk of not wanting to be classed in with COBOL programmers, I think that there are new technologies that are coming up, and they have their use cases, and it's great that they're adding to your toolbox, of solutions that you can bring to bear. I don't think the relational class of solutions is going away. There's a set of problem sets where the relational database is really the right tool for that. And that structure that exists within a relational database makes them far more efficient for that class of problems.
Yeah, if I may add, in the end of the day, it's about using the right tool for the right job, if you will, the right purpose. And NoSQL, or not only SQL databases, do have a function and a space and tangible scenarios, as does handling specifically big data and data lakes. But relational, I don't expect it will go away, at least in my lifetime, to be very honest.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, every application has data, and that data needs to be stored. And as Kevin said, there's some data that's just better stored relational. And even some of these NoSQL solutions or big data solutions, even some of them are actually based on SQL Server. Like, for example, we have big data clusters in SQL Server 2019 that's used for storing big data. It's built on top of multiple relational databases, multiple SQL servers. And so I think that relational database piece is always going to be a part of a complete data lifecycle management system. There's always going to be some part of that's relational. So I think those skills will carry.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else wants to take a stab at that question? It's
basically, as Kevin and Pedro were saying, just because a new shiny technology comes in does not make it does not make the old one irrelevant. It just adds to the value. So you probably should want, catch up on all the technologies, but at the same time, it does not make our technology irrelevant as it probably is the right tool for certain scenarios.
I want to add one more thing, because you just reminded me of something that I always used to tell my customers when I was in the field. And that was, sometimes log shipping just works. Yes, it's old. Yes, it's been around forever. Maybe it's not as shiny as availability groups, but darn it, it's simple, it's easy to configure, and it just works. So sometimes that older tool, it's the right tool for the job. So don't forget about it. Don't go for the shiny all the time.
I too am a big fan of log shipping, but I will say that the NoSQL or not only SQL, it's a very broad range of databases, into like document store, key value store, distributed database, graph databases. These are all extremely different ways of storing your data. So I think it would make a lot of sense if they started to group them more.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for all your suggestions and answers to that question. We'll move to the next one. This is more about a futuristic ask. What Fernando would like to know is, with the in-memory table, are we considering expiring rows or tables in the cache, depending upon the base of usage and all that? So.
Are we talking about where is that? Did you publish that question?
Yes, I clicked the publish now.
Okay. Considering expiring rows or tables in it. Oh, such as Reddit. Oh, so kind of like building our own cache around the memory optimized table?
Yep, it is more about if a particular row or a table, or a set of data is not being used, will it get moved out of in-memory?
So moved out of the
expired.
Oh, like tiered storage? Is that maybe? Are we?
Is this about in-memory tables, in-memory OLTP?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like a disk-based version? Is that the ask question?
I think the idea is that there's in-memory tables, and they want to either expire them and make them go away after some criteria, or roll them off into slower durable storage after some time. And that's all going to be application dependent. So we give you all the tools to build that solution, but we're not going to choose your criteria for you.
You can expire cache with Service Broker. I'm going to regret saying that.
So I did want to mention one thing, like if we are talking about like tiered storage, for example, having hot data in memory and then cold data on disk or something like that, if that's kind of what you're talking about, it's something that we have discussed. We don't have immediate plans for anything like that, but that's something that we have discussed.
Okay. I think we'll move to the next one here. Next one is just a funny question, and I don't know if you guys would want to answer this, but do you guys, any of you, secretly use any other RDBMS for your pet projects? Okay, guys, you've got to be honest for this one.
No.
Actually,
I still have
one at a time, please.
Sorry. Go on.
No, I don't have it. You go.
I can go. I have learned to stop worrying and love Postgres. I've been supporting Postgres for longer, actually, than I've been supporting SQL Server. So gradually it's grown on me. It has some weird kinks, but yeah, I use Postgres a lot of time for pet projects.
Yeah, and we do offer both Postgres and MySQL in Azure. So.
And MariaDB.
And MariaDB. Thank you.
Don't forget Maria.
I won't forget Maria.
Well, I still have nightmares of my one of my college professors mandating that a project had to be delivered on Oracle. So that's a recurring nightmare. I've recently rediscovered Postgres. Do I use it in a pet project? No, but it's becoming more part of my day-to-day. Let's just say that.
Mm-hmm. Cool. I think that should be it. We shouldn't go more on that particular question there. Okay, we have another question here, which is about, and I think this is more related to Linux. So how does SQL CLR particularly work on Linux? Does it use another .NET CLR or is it the same one? So can they just, would you want to take a stab at that?
Sure. So as you might know, SQL Server on Linux is based on a very thin layer called SQL PAL, or platform abstraction layer, and that particular layer includes support for certain translation of the API. Along with that, it also includes certain services, which includes the CLR, the regular CLR. It does not include the .NET Core runtime, but it includes the standard CLR runtime in the SQL PAL or the abstraction layer, so that SQL Server on Linux can use the built-in SQL CLR runtime to execute the CLR related code. That being said, as I think Vin or somebody earlier mentioned, that we have been extending the language extensibility using R, then Python, then now with Java, and that particular platform is extremely open. So eventually we could include, let's say, .NET Core in that as well. And that way we could have multiple other languages such as .NET Core, maybe even Go, Lang, we don't know, and we could include support for all those languages via language extensibility method.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Tejas. I think we have 3 more minutes and I can squeeze in one more question here. This is about, does the latest SSMS version support previous older versions of SQL like 2008 and previous to that? And would it have any limitations? Does
I was answering that one in writing, actually.
Okay.
That's fine, let's go. So yes, you can use the latest version of SSMS all the way back until SQL 2008. You will in the latest releases of SSMS, we have removed certain feature support, so you'll likely not have access to managing all the features through the UI as you did probably with V17 or even V16 of SSMS. However, the feature support that's there works well with SQL 2008. In other words, yes, you can use SSMS 18 to manage the SQL 2008. You may have some actions missing that you need to use a lower version, but what's there works as it should. Although, and then let me add, by the way, SSMS 2008 and 2008 R2 are now out of support. So that means that going forward with new releases, you may see some, we won't necessarily be testing the SSMS releases with those old versions of SQL Server because they are now unsupported.
Perfect. Okay, last one more question. I think this will be a short answer for this. Will we have SP3?
Who needs more than SP2? What?
What is the question?
The question.
Will there be an SP3? It's not on the roadmap.
No, not. We have something similar. It's USP WhatsApp, and that's in the Tiger Toolbox, aka .ms Tiger Toolbox. Go check that one out.
Pedro, you might just want to just put that on the chat so that
yes,
I can publish it
there.
And we can have everyone look at it. I think we completed the session. I think there's just like 45 seconds left, which I don't think will be good enough for the answers. But again, thank you all the panelists to be part of this particular session, and most of all, thank you for the attendees across the world for attending this and asking those lovely questions. I'm sure I couldn't publish all the questions out out there. Apologies because some fell out of the scope, some were probably not detailed enough. But if we can, we'll probably, panelists would have reached out privately for you. If not, maybe the next time we could definitely pick those questions up. And thank you so much for spending the time with us. Any last words from any of the panelists?
No,
Thanks.
we're thank you everyone. We're on time now.
Yeah, everyone.
Everyone, time
Thanks,
for
everyone.
us to go to bed, right?
1:30 in the morning. Let's go.
Yeah.
Have a good one, gentlemen.